Before we begin this story, I want to take a moment to share why Keanu Reeves holds such a special place in my heart and in the hearts of millions around the world. In an industry that often celebrates ego and self-promotion, Keanu stands as a quiet reminder that true greatness needs no spotlight. He has faced unimaginable loss in his life, from losing his best friend to tragedy, to experiencing the heartbreak of losing his child and partner. Yet through all of this pain, he never became bitter. He never stopped showing up with kindness. There are countless stories of him giving up his seat on the subway for strangers, of him taking pay cuts so film crews could keep their jobs, of him spending time with fans who approach him on the street. But what moves me most about Keanu is not just what he does in public. It is what he does when nobody is watching. And that is exactly what this story is about. A secret act of kindness that stayed hidden for 30 years. A truth that one woman carried to her grave. And a friendship built on something far deeper than Hollywood fame. This is the story of Keanu Reeves and Sandra Bullock. But more than that, this is a story about what it truly means to believe in someone when they cannot believe in themselves. The studio lights felt different that evening. Sandra Bullock noticed it the moment she stepped onto the familiar set of The Tonight Show, a soft golden glow that seemed to wrap around everything like a gentle embrace. The air carried that particular stillness that comes before something important happens, the kind of quiet that makes your heart beat just a little bit slower. She paused near the entrance, her fingers brushing against the worn edges of an old envelope she held close to her chest. Something stirred deep within her, a feeling she could not quite name, something between gratitude and grief, between joy and the ache of years gone by. The envelope was yellowed with age, its corners soft and bent from being handled countless times by hands that were no longer in this world. Sandra took a slow breath and let her eyes close for just a moment. The sounds of the bustling crew faded into the background as memories washed over her, memories of her mother, of a time when she was young and uncertain, of a kindness so pure that it had been hidden from her for 3 decades. Jimmy Fallon greeted her with his usual warm energy as she made her way to the guest chair. The audience applauded, their faces bright with anticipation. But tonight was not like the other nights Sandra had spent on this stage. Tonight she carried a weight that was both heavy and precious, a truth that needed to be spoken, a story that the world deserved to hear. Jimmy noticed something immediately. Her smile was there, but it trembled slightly at the edges. Her eyes held a shine that came not from studio lights, but from emotions threatening to spill over. "Sandra, you look like you have something on your mind," Jimmy said gently as the applause settled. She nodded slowly, clutching the envelope a little tighter. "I do, Jimmy. I came here tonight because there is something I need to share. Something I just learned 3 weeks ago that has completely changed the way I see my entire life." The audience grew quiet. Jimmy leaned forward in his chair, sensing the shift in atmosphere. "You know how everyone always says Keanu Reeves is the nicest person in Hollywood?" Sandra continued, her voice carrying a softness that demanded attention. "They say he is humble and kind and genuine, and all of that is true. But what I am about to tell you goes beyond anything anyone has ever known about him. What I am about to share is a secret he kept from me for 30 years. She lifted the envelope slightly, letting the cameras capture its aged appearance. "This letter was hidden in a box that belonged to my mother. She passed away many years ago, and I never found the courage to go through all of her things. 3 weeks ago, I finally opened that box, and inside, tucked away beneath old photographs and handwritten notes, I found this envelope. It had a note attached from my mother that said, 'Give this to Keanu when you feel the time is right. He made me promise never to tell you, but you deserve to know the truth. He is your guardian angel.'" Gasps rippled through the audience. Jimmy sat frozen, his expression a mixture of curiosity and deep emotion. Sandra looked down at the envelope, her thumb tracing the faded ink of her mother's handwriting. "To understand what is inside this letter, I need to take you back to 1994. Back to a time when I was nobody in this industry. Back to a film called Speed and a moment in my life when everything almost fell apart." She paused, gathering herself, feeling the weight of memory pressing against her chest. "I was 29 years old. I had been acting for years, taking small roles, struggling to pay my bills, wondering if I would ever get my big break. And then Speed came along. It was the opportunity of a lifetime, working alongside Keanu Reeves, doing something that could change everything for me. But 3 weeks into filming, I received news that shattered my world." Sandra stopped speaking. The silence in the studio was complete. Every eye was fixed on her, every breath held in anticipation. My mother was diagnosed with a serious illness, the kind that drains not just your hope but your entire bank account. Medical bills began piling up faster than I could count. Insurance covered almost nothing. I was faced with an impossible choice. Do I stay on this film and chase my dream while my mother suffers alone? Or do I walk away from everything I had worked for to be by her side and find a way to pay for her care? Jimmy reached out and gently touched her arm. "What did you do?" he asked quietly. Sandra looked up, a single tear escaping down her cheek. "I wrote my resignation letter. I was going to hand it to the director the very next morning. I had made peace with the fact that my dream was over. I would find other jobs, work double shifts, do whatever it took. My mother was more important than any movie." She took a shaky breath. But then something happened, something I could never explain until now. The audience leaned in collectively, as if pulled by an invisible thread. The next morning, before I could hand in my letter, a production assistant came to my trailer. She handed me a small note. No name, no signature, just a few words written in simple handwriting. Sandra recited the words from memory, her voice trembling. "Your mother's medical expenses have been covered by an anonymous donor. Focus on your dream. You deserve this." She looked at Jimmy, her eyes wide with the same disbelief she had felt all those years ago. "I thought it was a mistake. I called the hospital immediately. They confirmed it. Every single bill paid in full, every future treatment covered. They said a donor had set up a fund but wished to remain completely anonymous. I asked everyone I knew. I begged the studio, my agent, anyone who might have answers. Nobody would tell me anything." Jimmy shook his head slowly, amazement spreading across his face. "So for 30 years, Sandra said, her voice dropping to almost a whisper, I believed it was some kind of miracle, some act of fate or divine intervention. I thanked the universe every single day and moved forward with my life." She held up the envelope once more. "But 3 weeks ago, I learned the truth. And the truth, Jimmy, is something I am still trying to process." The light seemed to dim ever so slightly as the moment stretched on. "What is inside that envelope?" Jimmy asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Sandra looked at him, then at the camera, then at the audience. The answer to a question I never thought to ask, and a debt I can never repay. The year was 1994. Los Angeles was alive with the energy of a film industry reaching new heights, and on one particular studio lot, a movie called Speed was being brought to life. It was meant to be a simple action film about a bus that could not slow down. But for one young actress, it was a chance to prove that she belonged in a world that had overlooked her for far too long. Sandra Bullock arrived on set each morning before the sun fully rose. She would sit in her trailer and run through her lines over and over, whispering them to herself until they felt like second nature. She watched the way Keanu Reeves carried himself, calm and focused, never demanding attention yet commanding respect from everyone around him. He was already a star, having risen to fame through films that showcased both his talent and his quiet intensity. Sandra, on the other hand, was still finding her footing. Every scene felt like an audition. Every take felt like it might be her last. The first 2 weeks of filming were a blur of long hours and physical exhaustion. The action sequences pushed her body to its limits. She went home each night with bruises she did not mention and doubts she could not silence. But she kept showing up because this was her dream, and she was not ready to let it go. Then came the phone call that changed everything. Sandra remembered the exact moment. She was sitting in her trailer, finally allowing herself a few minutes of rest when her phone rang. It was her sister, and the tone in her voice made Sandra's stomach drop before a single word was spoken. Their mother, Helga, had collapsed. Tests were being run. The doctors were concerned. The days that followed were the hardest of Sandra's life. She would film scenes during the day, smiling and laughing as Annie, the brave and witty bus passenger who captures everyone's heart. But the moment the cameras stopped rolling, she would rush to her trailer and call the hospital, desperate for updates. Her mother's condition was serious. Treatments were expensive, and Sandra's bank account, already stretched thin from years of struggling, could not keep up. She remembered one night in particular. It was late, and the set had grown quiet. Most of the crew had gone home, but Sandra stayed behind, sitting on the steps of her trailer with her head in her hands. The weight of it all pressed down on her so heavily that she could barely breathe. She thought about the bills piling up, about the look on her mother's face the last time she visited, about the resignation letter she had already started writing in her mind. That was when Keanu found her. He did not say much at first. He simply sat down beside her on the steps, close enough that she could feel his presence but far enough to give her space. For a long time, neither of them spoke. The silence between them was not awkward. It was the kind of silence that comes when two people understand each other without needing words. Finally, Sandra broke. The tears she had been holding back for days spilled over, and she told him everything. About her mother, about the money, about the impossible choice she was facing. She told him that she was thinking of leaving the film, that she could not focus on her career while her mother was suffering, that she felt guilty every single moment she spent on set instead of by her mother's side. Keanu listened. He did not interrupt, did not offer empty reassurances, did not try to fix anything with words. He just listened. And when she finished, when her tears had slowed and her breathing had steadied, he looked at her with those kind, steady eyes and said something she would never forget. "You are exactly where you are supposed to be, Sandra. Your mother would want you here. And you being here working, fighting for your dream, that is how you honor her. Do not give up. Not now, not when you are so close." She wanted to believe him. She wanted to hold on to those words and let them carry her through. But the reality of her situation was too heavy. The next morning, she wrote her resignation letter. She folded it carefully, placed it in an envelope, and prepared to hand it to the director as soon as she arrived on set. But she never got the chance. A production assistant knocked on her trailer door just as she was about to leave. The young woman handed her a small piece of paper, folded in half, with no name or return address. Sandra opened it with trembling fingers and read the words that would echo in her mind for 3 decades. "Your mother's medical expenses have been covered by an anonymous donor. Focus on your dream. You deserve this." Sandra read the note 5 times before she could accept that it was real. She called the hospital immediately, convinced there had been some mistake. But the billing department confirmed everything. A substantial sum had been deposited into her mother's account. All current bills were paid. Future treatments were covered. And no, they could not reveal the identity of the donor. The person had insisted on complete anonymity. Sandra spent the next several days in a daze. She asked everyone she could think of. She questioned the producers, her agent, her friends, even strangers who worked on the film. Nobody knew anything, or if they did, they were not talking. Eventually, she stopped asking. She decided to accept this gift as a miracle, a sign from the universe that she was meant to keep going. She threw herself into the role of Annie with renewed determination, delivering a performance that would launch her into stardom and change her life forever. But there was something else happening behind the scenes. Something Sandra did not know about until she opened that envelope 3 weeks ago. The studio executives had been watching her closely during those difficult weeks. They noticed the bags under her eyes, the way her focus seemed to drift between takes, the whispers about personal problems affecting her performance, and they had made a decision. They were going to replace her. The paperwork was already being prepared. Another actress had been contacted. Sandra Bullock was about to lose the role that would define her career. And then, just as suddenly as it started, the discussion stopped. Sandra Bullock sat on the Tonight Show stage, the weight of 30 years pressing against her chest as she prepared to reveal what she had discovered. The audience remained silent, hanging on every word, sensing that something extraordinary was about to unfold. Jimmy Fallon leaned forward in his chair, his usual playful energy replaced by genuine anticipation. "I always wondered why everything changed so suddenly during those dark days on set," Sandra began, her voice steady but filled with emotion. "One moment I was drowning, barely holding on, convinced that my dream was slipping away. And then suddenly everything shifted. The pressure eased. The whispers stopped. The producers who had been watching me with doubt in their eyes suddenly became my biggest supporters." She paused, letting the memory wash over her. "I thought it was because my performance improved once my mother's bills were taken care of. I thought they finally saw what I was capable of when I was not carrying the weight of the world on my shoulders. I believed that for 30 years, Jimmy. I genuinely believed that I had saved myself through hard work and determination." Sandra lifted the envelope that had been resting in her lap throughout the interview. Her fingers trembled slightly as she opened it and pulled out several yellowed documents. "3 weeks ago, when I found this envelope in my mother's belongings, I discovered 3 things that completely shattered everything I thought I knew about that time in my life." She held up the first document, a collection of receipts and bank statements. These are the payment records for my mother's medical expenses. Every single bill, every treatment, every doctor visit. And here at the bottom of each receipt is a signature, not from an anonymous charity, not from some mysterious organization, from Keanu Reeves. He used a different name, a pseudonym he created specifically to hide his identity. But my mother figured it out. She recognized his handwriting from a card he had sent her after they met briefly at a premiere. Gasps echoed through the studio. Jimmy's eyes widened with disbelief. "Wait," he said slowly. "Keanu paid for all of your mother's medical treatment, his entire bonus from the film, and he never told you." Sandra nodded, tears beginning to form in her eyes. "Over $200,000, Jimmy. Every penny he earned as a bonus for Speed. He gave it all away without a second thought. And he made my mother promise, swear on everything she held dear that she would never tell me. He said if I knew, I might feel obligated or guilty. He said he just wanted me to fly." She carefully unfolded the second document, a handwritten letter on plain paper that had yellowed with age. "This is a letter Keanu wrote to my mother in 1994. I am going to read it to you exactly as he wrote it." The studio fell completely silent. Not a single person moved. Even the cameras seemed to hold their breath as Sandra began to read. "Dear Mrs. Bullock, I hope this letter finds you in better health than when we last spoke. I want you to know that your daughter is one of the most extraordinary people I have ever met. She has a light inside her that this world desperately needs to see. I have watched her work through unimaginable pressure with grace and determination. She never complains. She never asks for help even when she clearly needs it. She just keeps fighting." Sandra's voice cracked, but she continued. "I know she is struggling right now. I know she is thinking about walking away from everything to take care of you. And while that speaks to the beautiful person she is, I cannot let that happen. The world needs to see her shine. So I am asking you to accept this help and never tell her where it came from. If she knew, she would refuse it. She is too proud and too kind to accept what she would see as charity. But this is not charity, Mrs. Bullock. This is an investment. An investment in someone who is going to change lives, inspire millions, and prove that talent and kindness can exist together in this industry." Tears streamed freely down Sandra's face now. "Please take care of yourself. Your daughter loves you more than anything, and she needs you to fight. I will make sure she has the chance to become who she is meant to be. This is between us. With respect and admiration, Keanu." Jimmy wiped his own eyes, clearly moved beyond words. The audience sat in stunned silence, processing the depth of what they had just heard. "But that is not all," Sandra said, her voice barely above a whisper. "There is a third document, and this one, Jimmy, this one broke me completely when I read it." She held up a faded memo, the kind used for internal studio communications decades ago. "This is an internal memo from the Speed production team, dated just 2 days before my mother's bills were paid. It details a meeting between the producers and the studio executives, a meeting about replacing me." She took a deep breath before continuing. According to this memo, they had already contacted another actress. They had discussed how to handle the transition, how to reshoot my scenes, how to announce the change to the press. They called me a liability. They said my personal problems were affecting the production. They said the film could not afford to wait for me to get my life together. Jimmy shook his head slowly. "But you were not replaced. You stayed. You became a star because of that role." "Exactly," Sandra replied. "And for 30 years, I thought it was because my performance improved. I thought the producers changed their minds because they finally saw my potential." She held up the memo, pointing to a handwritten note at the bottom. "But look at this. Someone wrote these words during that meeting, someone who was in the room when they were deciding my fate." She read the note aloud. "If she goes, I go. No discussion, no negotiation. She stays or I walk, Keanu." The audience erupted in gasps and murmurs. Jimmy covered his mouth with his hand, visibly shaken. "Keanu Reeves threatened to walk off the film," Sandra said, her voice trembling with emotion. "His star power, his name, his reputation. He put all of it on the line for me. A struggling actress he barely knew. A woman who had done nothing for him. He risked his entire career to save mine." She set down the documents and looked directly at the camera. "Do you understand what this means?" she asked. "He did not just pay my mother's bills. He did not just believe in my talent. He stood up in a room full of powerful people and said no. He said that if they threw me away, they would lose him too. And because of that, because of his courage and his kindness, I am sitting here today. The silence that followed was profound. It stretched across the studio, into living rooms around the world, touching hearts that had never met Sandra Bullock or Keanu Reeves, but understood the power of what had been revealed. Jimmy finally found his voice. Did you confront him? He asked softly. Did you ask him why he never told you? Sandra smiled through her tears, a smile filled with love and gratitude and something that looked like wonder. I did, she said. I went to his house last week. I stood on his doorstep with these documents in my hand and 30 years of questions in my heart. And what he said to me, Jimmy, what he said is something I will carry with me for the rest of my life. She paused, looking at the audience, at the cameras, at the millions of people watching from their homes. But before I tell you what he said, I need you to understand something. Keanu Reeves is not a saint. He is not perfect. He is a human being who has faced more pain and loss than most of us could imagine. But he made a choice 30 years ago, a choice to believe in someone else when they could not believe in themselves, a choice to give without expecting anything in return, a choice to be kind in a world that often rewards cruelty. She held the documents close to her heart. And that choice changed everything, not just for me, but for everyone whose life I have touched since then. Every person I have helped, every charity I have supported, every moment of kindness I have offered, it all traces back to him, to one man who decided that a struggling actress was worth fighting for. The audience began to applaud, softly at first, then building into something powerful and sustained. Sandra let the moment wash over her, feeling the weight of gratitude and love that filled the room. Jimmy waited for the applause to fade before asking the question everyone wanted answered. What did Keanu say when you confronted him? He asked. After 30 years of silence, what did he finally tell you? Sandra took a deep breath, preparing to share the moment that had changed her understanding of kindness forever. The drive to Keanu's house had felt longer than any journey Sandra had ever taken. The documents rested on the passenger seat beside her, those yellowed papers that had unraveled 30 years of mystery in a single afternoon. Her hands gripped the steering wheel tightly as questions raced through her mind. Why had he done it? Why had he never said a word? How could someone give so much and ask for nothing in return? She remembered pulling into his driveway, the quiet neighborhood feeling worlds away from the chaos of Hollywood. Keanu's home was modest, unassuming, exactly what she would have expected from a man who had never let fame change who he was. For several minutes, she simply sat in her car, staring at the front door, trying to gather the courage to face him with the truth she had uncovered. When she finally knocked, her heart was pounding so loudly she was certain he could hear it. The door opened, and there he was. Keanu Reeves, older now, with silver threading through his dark hair, but with those same kind eyes that had looked at her with such warmth 3 decades ago. He saw her face, saw the envelope in her trembling hands, and in that moment he knew. He knew that the secret he had kept for 30 years had finally been revealed. Sandy, he said softly, stepping aside to let her in. She could not speak at first. Tears were already streaming down her face as she walked into his home. He guided her to the living room, that same calm presence she remembered from their days on set. He made her tea, moving slowly and deliberately, giving her time to find her words. When he finally sat across from her, the silence between them was heavy with unspoken emotion. Sandra held up the documents, her hands shaking. 30 years, Keanu, she whispered. 30 years you kept this from me. You paid my mother's bills. You threatened to leave the film if they replaced me. You believed in me when I did not believe in myself, and you never said a single word. Keanu looked at her, his expression gentle but unreadable. How did you find out? He asked quietly. My mother, Sandra replied. She kept everything. The receipts, your letter, the studio memo. She hid it all in a box that I only opened 3 weeks ago. She left me a note saying you made her promise never to tell me. She called you my guardian angel. Keanu was silent for a long moment. He looked down at his hands, then back at Sandra, and she saw something in his eyes that she had never seen before. Vulnerability. The kind of openness that comes when someone has been carrying a secret for so long that releasing it feels like letting go of a part of themselves. Your mother was an incredible woman, he finally said. When I met her at that premiere, she talked about you for almost an hour. The pride in her voice, the love in her eyes. She told me about your struggles, about how hard you had worked to get where you were. And when I found out she was sick, when I saw what it was doing to you, I knew I had to help. But why, Sandra asked, her voice breaking. Why did you give away everything you earned? Why did you risk your career for someone you barely knew? Why did you never tell me? Keanu leaned forward, his eyes locked on hers. Because it was not about me, Sandra. It was never about me. It was about you, your talent, your heart, your mother's love for you and your love for her. I saw something breaking and I had the means to help fix it, that is all. But your entire bonus, Sandra protested. Over $200,000. You could have done anything with that money. Keanu smiled gently, that same quiet smile she remembered from 30 years ago. It was just money, he said simply. Sandra, watching you become who you are, seeing you win that Oscar, seeing you raise your beautiful children and inspire millions of people around the world. That was my return on investment. That was worth more than any paycheck I have ever received. Sandra shook her head, overwhelmed by the depth of his selflessness. You changed my life, she whispered. Keanu reached out and took her hands in his. No, he said firmly but kindly. You changed your own life. I just made sure nobody got in your way. You did the work. You delivered the performance. You built the career. All I did was remove an obstacle that should never have been there in the first place. Tears fell freely down Sandra's cheeks as she absorbed his words. But why the secrecy, she asked. Why did you make my mother promise never to tell me? Keanu was quiet for a moment, choosing his words carefully. Because I know you, Sandy. Even back then, I could see who you were. If you had known that someone paid your mother's bills, you would have felt obligated. You would have spent years trying to pay me back, trying to prove that you deserved the help. You would have carried guilt instead of gratitude, and I did not want that for you. He squeezed her hands gently. I wanted you to fly. I wanted you to believe that the universe was on your side, that you were meant to succeed, that your dreams were valid. I wanted you to walk onto that set every day knowing that you belonged there, not because someone helped you, but because you earned it. Sandra could barely breathe. The magnitude of what he had done, not just the money, not just the career intervention, but the careful, thoughtful way he had protected her spirit, was almost too much to comprehend. How can I ever thank you, she asked. How can I ever repay what you did? Keanu smiled, releasing her hands and leaning back in his chair. You already have, he said, every time you help someone without expecting anything in return. Every time you show kindness to a stranger. Every time you use your platform to make the world a little bit better. That is how you thank me. That is how you repay a debt that was never a debt to begin with. He paused, his expression becoming thoughtful. Kindness is not supposed to have an audience, Sandy. It is just supposed to exist. It is supposed to flow from one person to another without fanfare, without recognition, without any expectation of reward. That is what makes it real. That is what makes it powerful. Sandra sat with his words, letting them sink deep into her heart. I asked him one more thing that night, Sandra told Jimmy and the audience, her voice steady now, filled with a peace that had eluded her for weeks. I asked if I could share this story with the world. I told him that people needed to hear it, that they needed to know that this kind of selfless love exists. Jimmy leaned forward. What did he say? Sandra smiled, a smile that radiated warmth and gratitude. He said, if it inspires even one person to help another without expecting credit, then it is worth sharing. The audience erupted in applause, but Sandra raised her hand gently, asking for silence. There was more she needed to say. I have thought a lot about what this story means, she continued. Not just for me, but for all of us. We live in a world that constantly tells us to promote ourselves, to document our good deeds, to make sure everyone knows how kind and generous we are. Social media rewards those who broadcast their charity. Fame goes to those who make the biggest noise. She shook her head slowly. But Keanu taught me something different. He taught me that the most powerful acts of kindness are the ones that nobody sees. He taught me that true generosity expects nothing in return, not even gratitude. He taught me that believing in someone, really believing in them, sometimes means stepping back and letting them shine without ever knowing you were there. Tears glistened in her eyes once more. For 30 years, I thought I had made it on my own. I thought my success was entirely my own creation. And in some ways it was. I worked hard. I faced rejection. I kept going when everything told me to stop. But I also had someone in my corner who I never knew about. Someone who saw my potential when I could not see it myself. Someone who invested in my future without ever asking for recognition. She looked directly at the camera, speaking now to the millions watching from their homes. That is the lesson I want to share with you tonight. You never know who is watching. You never know whose life you might change with a single act of kindness. And you never know how far the ripples of your generosity might spread. She paused, letting her words settle. Keanu Reeves saved my mother's life. He saved my career. He gave me the chance to become who I was meant to be. And he did it all in silence, asking for nothing, expecting nothing, wanting nothing but to see another human being succeed. The studio lights seemed to glow warmer as Sandra delivered her final thoughts. So I ask you, she said softly, who can you believe in today? Who in your life is struggling, doubting themselves, ready to give up? What can you do to help them without needing them to know it was you? How can you be someone's guardian angel without ever claiming the title? She smiled, peace radiating from her entire being. Kindness does not need an audience. It just needs a willing heart. And if we all chose to love a little more quietly, to give a little more freely, to believe in each other a little more deeply, imagine what kind of world we could create. At that moment, the audience rose to their feet, applause thundering through the studio. But the applause grew even louder when a familiar figure emerged from backstage. Keanu Reeves walked out, humble and slightly embarrassed by the standing ovation, his hands tucked in his pockets, that gentle smile on his face. Sandra rushed to embrace him, holding on tightly to the man who had changed her life without ever seeking credit. When they finally separated, Jimmy approached them both, visibly moved. "Keanu," Jimmy said, his voice thick with emotion, "why did you keep this secret for so long?" Keanu looked at Sandra, then at the audience, then back at Jimmy. He shrugged slightly, that characteristic humility shining through. "Because kindness is not supposed to be a performance," he said simply. "It is just supposed to be real." The audience erupted again, but Keanu raised his hand gently. "I am not special," he continued. "I am just someone who had the chance to help and took it. We all have those chances. Every single day we have opportunities to lift someone up, to believe in someone who is struggling, to make a difference without needing anyone to know about it. I hope this story reminds you of that. I hope it inspires you to be the person someone else needs, even if they never find out it was you." Sandra took his hand, standing beside him as they faced the audience together. "This is not just a story about Keanu Reeves," she said. "This is a story about what is possible when we choose kindness over recognition, generosity over ego, love over fame. It is a reminder that the smallest acts of compassion can change the entire trajectory of a life." She looked at Keanu with tears in her eyes. "And it is my promise," she said, "that I will spend the rest of my life paying this forward. Not because I owe a debt, but because I have seen what is possible when one person decides to believe in another." Keanu smiled at her, that same warm, steady presence he had been for 30 years. "That is all any of us can do," he said. "Just keep believing in each other, keep showing up with kindness, and trust that the ripples we create will reach shores we will never see." The Tonight Show studio fell silent for a moment, the weight of their words settling over everyone present. Then, slowly, the applause began again, not the loud, thunderous kind, but something softer, more reverent, a collective acknowledgement that something sacred had just been shared. As the credits began to roll, Sandra and Keanu stood together, two friends bound by a secret that had finally been told, a kindness that had finally been honored, and a lesson that would echo far beyond that studio, far beyond that night, into the hearts of everyone who had witnessed it. Real heroes do not wear capes. They wear kindness quietly, and they never ask for the spotlight. The greatest gift you can give another person is your belief in them, not the kind of belief that demands proof or expects reward, but the kind that simply says, "I see you, I believe in you, and I am here, even if you never know." That is the legacy of Keanu Reeves. That is the gift he gave Sandra Bullock, and that is the invitation extended to each of us. Be someone's guardian angel. Believe in someone who cannot believe in themselves. Give without expectation, love without condition. And remember, kindness does not need an audience, it just needs you.